There's another little quirk that I've spotted with this. When you call the registration up, if you have the volume, when the volume comes, let me just sort of explain this. When the volume pulls through the registration, or the registration pulls through the volume even, whatever it's set at, if you just touch the little volume slider, it suddenly comes back to full volume. So it's not, I don't know what it's doing. It's like it's remembering the volume previously, but when you touch it, it just suddenly jumps to the level. I think that needs looking at from KETRON, really.
Greetings out there and welcome to this very short presentation. This is to talk about that feature that Lee, thanks to him again for that video. We're going to put a link on the bottom to the full video that he did with regards to the KETRON event and his thoughts about it, right? So this has been a very interesting subject among many users out there in terms of the slider volume, okay, and the display on the screen. So let's go over here so I can show you exactly what we are referring to. So if you have your instrument right now, let's say you have these volumes, you will notice that as you move the volume up and down, the actual current representation of where that volume at is displayed on the screen. So if I move the slider down for the bass, the chords, you can see that. Now, this is not to say this is duplication, right? If you're performing live at any given time, the slider location is going to be represented on the screen by the number 0 to 127, and the blue that shows you exactly how loud or how low that particular chord part is, right? Now, when you start to use registrations, remember, a registration is a snapshot of the keyboard at any given time. So when you, let's say, prepare a song for a performance, right? And let's say you prepare that song and you had the volume down here, all the way down here. And let's say you had the volume of the chords over here, right? And let's say the volume of the right-hand voice was over here. So now, this is how you set the keyboard up before you stored it in a register. Well, guess what? If you recall the register, had it been that we had motorized sliders or faders, motorized faders, when you recall that registration, not only are you going to see this value on the screen, but the sliders are going to move into the location to represent exactly how that volume was stored in the registration. Now, for some other keyboard manufacturers, they're using LEDs either on the side or they're using rotary knobs with LEDs. So what happens is with a rotary knob, which doesn't have a start or end point, it's a lot easy because then the LED displays how much the volume is at any given time. In this particular scenario, the best option would have been to have motorized sliders, right? But in the absence of that, what happens is when you now recall a registration, let's say you turn this keyboard off and you go to your show for, on stage, and then you turn the keyboard on. And when you turn the keyboard on, let's say you moved it around, okay? And the sliders are now, let's say, all the way maxed up, or let's even say all the way down, right? You can see that, again, it's showing you the true representation of the instrument. But when you get to the show right now, and you go to registration, and you load this one, let's say the Brown Eyed Girl, and you press enter. Now watch what happens. If I get out of this screen, you see what happened? My sliders are representing, well, at this point, nothing really, because they physically are down here. But the screen always tells you the true volume levels of any given part. So my drums are over here right now. Even though my slider is at 0, if I press start, I'm going to hear, But again, what is the value here is 0. When you're performing live, you, the artist, always have the right to override whatever registration or setting or whatever the keyboard is set at. So now, at this level, if you try to move the volume up, see what happened? The drums were immediately cut off because now the keyboard is taking the current value of the volume slider and bringing that into play. And that's why the sound instantly cut off. And if you notice, also on the screen, it went from wherever it was recalled down to almost 0. Now, some manufacturers have used what they call a catch feature, which some people like and some people don't like, right? The catch feature means that, let's say you recall the registration. Let's do that again. I want to recall this registration, okay? So now, what does the catch feature do? If you move this volume slider anywhere before the volume level, nothing happens. In other words, the arranger ignores it, right? But the moment you get to where the current volume is at, then the slider becomes active. And it avoids that issue of having to, go mute and then all of a sudden, blare through your speakers or whatever, which is very, very nice, right? But what does KETRON come up with as a solution to that? Well, guess what? When you go to create a registration, now with 4.0 or higher, when you go to make a registration, when you hit save, you have this feature that tells you filters are inactive. That's the default. You want to activate these filters and you want to tell the keyboard what things you want to store in the registration, right? Which means that you can also ignore certain things. Why? Because that way, when you are now at the performance, when you recall the registration, it's going to take whatever values that the sliders are at that time, which means that if the sliders are down here on 0 and you recall a registration and you said, hey, I want you to load that registration, but don't take into consideration the volume when I stored it. However, take into consideration the volume the way it is right now as I am performing live. Then in that particular case, it will be a true representation of the volume which you see, which means that the volume you see on the screen will be exactly the same as the physical slider and the same when you recall it. Because guess what? When you recall the registration, it's not going to take into consideration the slider position, right? Also, this is another interesting point to make right here as well too. If you go into menu and you go into registration setup, okay, right here, you can also tell the arranger in more detail, okay, listen, what are the things that when I call or when I recall a registration, I want to grab, okay? So no matter what I stored, what do I want to recall when I recall a registration? Under general, I can recall the transposer value. So what was the transposition value when I stored the registration? You can recall that. I can recall the slider color. What were the color of the sliders, for an example? The foot switch setting, the drawbar view, okay? If I go under style, which is very important, what do I want to recall when I recall a registration? Do I want to recall the split point? If the answer is yes, you make it yellow. If I don't want to recall the split point, I keep it as white, okay? Do I want to recall the view, the drum mixer, the drum settings, the balance, the bass, the chord? These are the things that you want to recall yellow, or you don't want to recall white when you recall a registration, okay? Now you go to voice. Again, I want to recall my right voice. What voice did I use when I was trying to create the registration, right? Play mode, the DSP, the MIDI setting, the MIDI channel, the preset value. What do I want to recall? Make it yellow, okay? Once you set it up here, you now hit save and you save this as a registration setup, which means that whenever you turn this keyboard off and on, it will remember the things that you want to recall when you recall a registration and the things that you want to ignore when you recall a registration. So this was a very, very important video indeed, because this has been something that has been discussed at length and manufacturers have looked into it and each one has their own solution. Again, if you ask me my personal advice, I would say have motorized faders, but then again, that's going to be an additional cost, an additional weight to the keyboard, and just another extra thing that can break for those of you who are using the keyboards performing very, very well live in church or at gigs and what have you. So it's something to think about, but then again, we have that solution in there, which we've discussed right now. So yes, default, it will be jumpy depending on what value you store, but you can get away by what I just showed you and talk to you about. So let's say good night right now, good day, good evening, whatever it is. I'll say ciao, and I shall look forward to seeing you all in the next video. AJ at KETRON, take care.